PTSD among men and women in the uniformed forces. What is the impact of PTSD? How do they cope? And how can their support systems support them along the process? Well, more on this in a moment. My name is Gladys Gachanja and this is your world. Tanzania publishes COVID-19 data first time in over a year.
Focus is on limiting social contacts.
South African president reimposes restrictions for 2 weeks to combat a surge in the highly contagious coronavirus Delta variant. So, what is the impact of post-traumatic stress disorder in men and women in the uniformed forces? We find out in a moment.
It's not too spicy, it's very well balanced, and hence its global appeal.
Mumbai celebrity chef of the world's best butter chicken takes a break from COVID-19 relief efforts and resumes work. Thank you for joining us on this broadcast. As I mentioned today, we are focusing on post-traumatic stress disorder amongst those of the uniformed forces. And the question of the day is, are you living with post-traumatic stress disorder? Share your experience using that hashtag new normal. Are you living with PTSD? Share your experience using that hashtag new normal. And as always, remember, you can reach us using those numbers at the bottom of your screen. But before we get to that critical conversation, let's take a look at the impact of COVID-19 around the world. And the statistics this morning stand at 182,192,485 confirmed cases. Out of that number, 166,749,682 have recovered and 3,945,318 deaths have been reported due to COVID-19. In the country, well, those numbers this morning stand at 182,884 confirmed cases. And according to the press release by the Ministry of Health yesterday, 124,588 have recovered, and unfortunately 3,612 deaths have been attributed to COVID-19. Away from that, and actually still focusing on some of the stories making headlines, and 7 days after Ethiopians went to the poll, provisional results are yet to be released. The country's electoral commission has so far given positive reviews of the polls, even as the international community raised concerns over insecurity in the northern region of Tigray. Leila Mohammed reports that Kenya is also interested in the political events in Ethiopia. Recent reports
in a national election on Monday, the 21st of June, in a vote with an expected result favoring Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. While the vote was boycotted by leading opposition parties, including the Oromo Federalist Congress, there are complaints about how open and fair the elections were in Africa's second most populous country. Many in the region and the international community are waiting with bated breath to see who takes charge, even as they continue to raise concerns over the humanitarian situation in the north.
I think there is a lot of international pressure, especially from the West, that something needs to be done, especially dealing with the issues of humanitarian aid in the region and human rights violations that apparently have been taking place by various parties in the conflict.
The incumbent Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has stated that the federal government has done its best to ensure communities there are catered for with supplies, but on the other hand is taking heat for military action in Tigray that emergency responders claim has killed many, including some of their own. For countries like Kenya, bolstering economic ties is one of the many reasons why they would be interested in the political events in Ethiopia.
Kenya already has strong relations with Ethiopia, but even strengthening those relations will probably allow the LAPSET, give sort of new force to the LAPSET project.
The project, which began in the Kibaki era under PM Meles Zenawi, slowed down a bit over time, but with the completion of the first bath this year, Kenya could be looking into strengthening those business prospects with Ethiopia.
Domestic market in Ethiopia, it is an important market, which outside powers, of course, are also looking at, such as China, principally, but others as well. So LAPSET, in that way, has been in the calculations of the Ethiopian government for quite some time as an alternative route.
Kenya has recently made huge inroads in the Ethiopian telecommunications market with the entry of Safaricom as a mobile telephone service provider, an event that was unveiled by heads of both states. Leila Mohammed, NTV.
Now, recent reports indicate that fighters calling themselves Tigray Defense Forces took control of regional capital Mekelle Monday night. Now, witnesses say Ethiopian army has been pulling out or was seen pulling out, and this is a story we're definitely keeping an eye on, and we'll give you more details in our subsequent bulletins. Now back to the impact of COVID-19, and for the first time in over a year, Tanzania has published COVID-19 statistics, with the president indicating her country's openness to vaccination. President Suluhu Hassan says 100 infections have been recorded since the third wave struck globally, and 70 of those patients are said to be on oxygen support. And in terms of the COVID-19 vaccinations, well, Tanzania says it is ready to spend $470 million to purchase the vaccines through the global access body COVAX. Though the infection figures may seem conservative, the move by President Suluhu to publish this information signals progress in her administration's openness to acknowledging the effect of the global pandemic. A far cry clearly from her predecessor, the late John Pombe Magufuli. And still on COVID-19, and South Africa has imposed restrictions for 2 weeks due to a surge in the coronavirus Delta variant in the country. So this has been put in place to control the third wave. All public gatherings are banned. Eateries and restaurants will not serve in-dining meals, and the nighttime curfew starts at 9 p.m. till 4 a.m. Schools are expected to be closed by Friday, but most businesses will forge ahead, operating at full capacity. Since February, about 2.7 million people have been vaccinated for Gauteng province. In and out leisure travel has also been outlawed.
That we will place these additional restrictions in place for the next 14 days. And after 14 days, we will examine exactly where we are. We will assess the impact of these interventions and restrictions after these 14 days. Our focus is on limiting social contacts while preserving the economy and preserving livelihoods.
Elsewhere, the Democratic Republic of Congo's president, that is Felix Tshisekedi, if I can take that again, well, the president of Congo, Tshisekedi, and Rwandan counterpart Paul Kagame visited the site of the May eruption of Mount Nyiragongo near their two countries' borders in a rare visit and show of solidarity. Now, the leaders also signed several agreements to build a strong relationship between the two countries. Well, in line with our conversation today, that is post-traumatic stress disorder. As I mentioned earlier, my colleague Brian Bushiri spoke to David Etale, a veteran Lance Corporal in the British Army, on his experience with the same and how he has managed to cope.
Let's talk about your life, David. I mean, you've been in Kenya, in the United Kingdom, in Afghanistan. What's your story like?
I just had a normal life, like just any other ghetto child would have. Just everyone, young boys, their dreams of becoming professional footballers one day.
Fast forward, umeingia army, training iko, tuende Iraq na Afghanistan and all the war zones that you had covered in your time. Talk to us about that.
Afghanistan ilikuwa, hiyo time nilikuwa was the most challenging and difficult operational tours in the history of the British Army. And at that particular moment in time, I was a driver. And I was driving one of the heaviest armored vehicles. It's called a jackal vehicle. So we were going to watch over some troops who were doing patrols on the ground. So as we were on the higher ground. And then kuna mzungu mmoja beste yangu alikuwa nyuma who was manning the gun. Akakuja akasema ati ameboeka, he needs some action. Hata kumaliza hiyo sentence. Tukakuwa ambushed by the Taliban, like almost like over 50 Talibans. Walitokea sijui from nowhere. So ikakuwa, it started being now, it's a battle now. We are fighting against them. They are firing rounds at us. We are firing back. So ile ilinyamaza tu like for 5 minutes wakarudi tena. So ikabidi, we have to leave that place. So mdosi akaniambia, we need to leave. So ikabidi nimeingia tena kwa the jackal vehicle. So I drove about 50 meters. And then that's when I drove over an improvised explosive device. Then from there sikumbuki kitu yote. Niliamka tu nikiwa Hosi, UK.
Umeamka in UK, umepata your accident, you don't have a limb now. Sasa hiyo life tena imeturn out kuwa aje sasa?
To be honest, I was in a very dark place. I attempted suicide twice. And that was because nilikuwa najisikia like life yangu imeisha. And then at the same time, I was reliving everything that transpired in Afghanistan. The horrible things that I saw that are happening to my friends and the things that we were doing when we are out there. And those replays of those emotions of sad, fear, you're feeling like you're a burden to the society. That's what drove me to attempting suicide twice. And I actually attempted them, but they failed. During that time, when I was doing these things, I wasn't myself. Unajua, I was fighting demons inside my head that I'm still in the war zone. And that was the difficult part for me.
Huku Kenya, Mathe na Fathe, they're so happy that their son went and joined the army. Na sasa, he's an amputee. What was the impact on both your parents?
Actually, my dad never saw me as an amputee because he passed away. My mom, she's a very powerful Christian. So my mom was really supportive. My best friend, the late Kevin Oliech, was very supportive. And then another thing that made me start realizing that, wait a minute, that whatever I'm going through, I'm not alone, is when you're transferred to the military hospital where now you meet your other friends who are triple amputees, double amputees, serious brain injuries, where people can't even eat by themselves. So when I was in that environment and I could see my friends, how they've taken everything in a positive way, I came back and asked myself, I called myself for a meeting actually. And I remember I went to my room and I said to myself, God, please forgive me for the way I've been.
How has life now been with this new David Etale, the motivational speaker, the one who encourages young people, young soldiers, young soccer players in the UK How's that for you now?
To be honest, it's a blessing. Sometimes I pinch myself to realize that God has put me in this position. And the reason why I say that is because mimi nilikuwa tu kijana wa mtaa, nilikuwa siongeangi sana, nilikuwa nimetulia, nilikuwa nafanya vitu sifai kufanya. God amenipatia opportunity, nimejoin British Army, nimekuja nimeumia, nimeenda kwa war zone, I've seen the worst. But now here I am today, that I go to schools here in the UK and speak to students about adversity and resilience. You know, I go to corporates, companies to speak about adversity and resilience. I've been invited when I visit Kenya every single time. I have friends of mine who invite me to radio stations, TV stations. I go to schools in Kenya just to encourage the young generation. And for me, that gives me this joy that mimi hata sijiangaliangi kama mimi ni amputee. Hiyo narrative ya PTSD, especially somewhere like Kenya, people don't take it serious, but it's a very troubling issue right now because mental health is the #1 killer disease in the world right now, apart from what has been going on since COVID started, you know. And I think when someone is going through something, I normally tell people, look for someone that you trust, that you can sit down with and talk to them. And another thing is, I would also like to say about men. Men, it's also okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to cry because you're a human being. There's nowhere where it's written. Life kama tungekuwa tumezaliwa na unapewa hivi script, kama vile wewe unapewa script kuniuliza maswali, life ingekuwa rahisi. Nanielewa?
Ni kweli.
But hatuna script. The best thing that you can do is try and be the best version of yourself every single day.
Wow, what a conversation, what a man. David Etale, veteran Lance Corporal. That's this morning's episode of Your Voice. My name is Brian Mushiri. Good morning and be nice to others.
A very, very good perspective there from David Etale, even as he walks this journey of living with post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of what he has mentioned will actually delve further, even as we hear from others who walk in his shoes. And speaking of which, in studio, I'm joined by Byron Adera, who is a pioneer ex-Kenya Special Forces officer. Thank you for joining us. Joining us in the other studio, Joseph Gitumbe, who is an ex-KDF officer. And joining us virtually is Major Retired Lucy Mukiria, who is a psychologist. Thank you for joining us. And before we even get to react to some of what David Etale has put out there, Lucy, it is so important that we understand further a little bit of the science behind PTSD. And I have some graphics, if we can have them on screen, to just explain some of these things. First of all, PTSD is a mental health disorder that may occur in people who have experienced or witnessed a traumatic event. Now, these traumatic events can include and not limited to natural disasters, serious accidents, terrorist attacks, war or combat, physical injury, sexual and gender-based violence, kidnappings, threats of death, sexual violence, or serious injury. Remember, this list could go longer than that. Now, some of the symptoms of PTSD are nightmares or flashbacks, avoidance of situations that bring back the trauma, uncontrollable thoughts about the event, anxiety or depressed mood, bouts of anger and aggression. Now note that these symptoms are different for different people. Now when it comes to treatment, they say PTSD can help you regain a sense of control over your life, but the primary treatment is psychotherapy, but can also include medication to manage symptoms. So even as we delve into this, Lucy, perhaps you can help us out understand this further. What makes traumatic events haunt some people after the fact and not others?
Well, I guess number one, it's a matter of reporting. some people don't get the opportunity to articulate what's going on with them. I think it's an important place to start from, because we are so attuned to, if somebody hasn't said it, it doesn't exist. And if they say it, then it becomes real. So I think for our situation, I think that's a good place to start from. And then secondly, people will be affected or not affected depending on what their traumatic exposure has been, right? If you have somebody who has been experiencing trauma from maybe the time they were even, their mother was pregnant with them, it will be different from somebody who has been protected and sheltered and maybe encounters a traumatic event, perhaps in their 20s or their 30s, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have other people who basically have certain parts of their brain switched off and they don't have the ability to sympathize or empathize, and therefore are not affected by the normal human experience that other people may have. So there are different categories of people, there are different reactions, but it's always important to really delve into it and understand the case-by-case people and how they are presenting or not presenting and the reasons behind that.
Okay, that gives a good perspective. Now, just listening to David Etale, considering that you have worked for several years with uniformed forces, does this ring true and sound very familiar?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, first of all, like David Etale, God bless you. Thank you so much. Like, he has really, really triggered, and he has made me cry because, he's taken something that is so difficult for people to articulate and put it out so simply and so powerfully. So, just God bless him so much. I feel like, now he has said that, let's just shut the topic and move on. But I think he has really given a whole lot of insight into just how important this matter is and why it requires so much attention.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and perhaps we can hear it more from those that wear the same shoes. I'll start with you, Byron. What is your experience with PTSD?
Well, thanks for the question, Gladys. In my case, I think the most adverse of this exposure came from between 2008, 2011, and it peaked around 2009, 2010. After we got involved in a lot of traumatic experiences, starting with which, in my case, that was the post-election violence, and we all know the hottest of the regions where we participated, the Rift Valley, particularly in Eldoret, had loads and loads of traumatic, issues. But on the hindsight as well, behind me as the support systems that I either had or lacked, was the family situations that I had, domestics that were basically getting out of hand. And so that destabilized me quite a bit. From that theater, very, very quickly, we were ushered into Mount Elgon, what the Army calls counterinsurgency operations, and which I was honored to have, been among the first people to step foot as combatants inside that jungle. And the complexity of jungle operations or warfare, for that matter, impacts you in very, profound ways, psychologically, physically. It's very arduous for that matter. And again, getting to lose someone who's very, very close at the end of the day was something that did tip me, over. To some extent. So I was battling quite a bit of stuff, and I did get into some very deep depression, and which in 2009, thereabouts, towards the end of 2009, got me into the wards to some extent. And I did go down with Bell's palsy. I think that was the saddest for me. I guess if we can all toy with things that affect you potentially physically, but mental issues are really, really crazy to go through. And the worst of it is when you are in an environment where people are looking up to you. So in which case you are a commander and you have to stay strong and put up that strong face and still be able to perform at that peak level where you the work demands. But here you are, you feeling like you want to hide, especially your face. For those who know what Bell's palsy does to your face, you've got a twisted face. You can't potentially talk properly, and for me that was the lowest ahead.
Wow. Okay, so you said you had a lot of things happening that predisposed you to PTSD. At what point did you realize that something was off?
Well, from 2009, beginning of 2009, I guess I was hiding quite a bit and bottling up quite a bit, putting up a brave face. But then basically I picked up very heavy drinking, and there's literally no brand of, say, whiskey that I didn't know in the officers' mess. And this impacted me, financially. The domestic spiraled out of control as well. Of course, the support systems weren't there. So you are there and you're going through a lot of stuff, and you don't have either guide to your left or right. And you can realize how much you are alone, even when you have so many people around you. So it was such a lonesome kind of environment that I think everybody that goes through some mental health situations, and especially when they're surrounded by people that are looking up to them, and they got to act brave and also to be very, basically live on the straight and narrow edge where you're a commander and potentially you are a star in this environment. So my realization, I think, came when the knock-on effect of getting involved or suffering from mental, these mental kind of challenges was in, the things that I could see. I mean, you can pretty much see that you're draining your bank account in with days, if not weeks. You into, say, loads and loads of bills. The alcoholism is getting out of control. I mean, it was very, very chaotic.
Wow.
Very chaotic, yes.
All right. Let's hear from Joseph Gitumbe, ex-KDF officer. Ukisikiza Etale, ukisikiza Byron, does it ring a bell? As in, ni kitu familia, ni kitu pia wewe umepitia, na ni yapi ulipitia?
Kwanza kabisa, nashukuru Mungu kwamba Mungu aliwasaidia wao, akasaidia Etale na mkubwa wangu Etale, Byron. Nasema kwamba hiyo situation wamepitia ilikuwa mbaya sana. Sometimes inafanya mtu anasikia kulia. Na yangu nikishare haikuwa rahisi, lakini nashukuru Mungu alinisaidia nikatoboa. Na kwa ufupi, mimi yangu ilianza 2013 na issue yangu ilianza from the word go. Kwamba tumetumwa kazi somewhere kufanya hiyo assignment, tukafika huko na tukarudi, lakini njiani gari yetu ikaanguka. So ukiona hii sura yangu vile niko hapa, niliumia vibaya sana. So mimi nilijikuta ICU. So kujipata ICU huko, nikashughulikiwa, nikarudishwa kwa ward. Nilikuwa kwa coma for 1 week. So wakati nimesha jisikia tu kuamka tu hivi, tulikuwa tumewekwa pamoja na askari mwingine hapo mwenye tuliumia na yeye. Hata yeye aliumia kwa kichwa, na sasa yeye ndiye alikuwa ananiona. Sasa vile nimeamka tu hivi, mimi nilikuwa na ile mentality kwamba tuko huko penye tulikuwa tumetumwa assignment. Kwa hivyo nilijaribu kuamka, nikasema kwani hapa ni aje kumeenda, na jaribu retaliate na ile situation yenye tulikuwa huko. But huyo mwenzangu ambaye alikuwa hapo aliniambia hapa tuko hospitalini. So yeye badala aniambie chenye kiliendelea, yeye alianza tu kuniambia, unajua wewe ulikuwa umekufa. Hata ona kichwa yako. Kichwa yako hata ukiona vizuri macho ni kama ifanya nini? Imetoka. Wewe tulikuwa tumekuhesabu umekufa. So wakati ananiambia hivyo najaribu kushika. Ananiambia usishike. Hiyo kichwa hata ilikuwa imefunguka kabisa, hata ubongo ulikuwa unaonekana. So hiyo mambo ambayo alikuwa ananiambia ilikuwa very negative. Sasa vile ananiambia, na imagine nilikuwa for coma for 1 week. Kwa hivyo mimi nilianza kuchukua those negative words kuja kwangu. Ananiambia hata ubongo ulikuwa umetoka. So nikijaribu kushika hivi, ananiambia hata ukishika saa hizi ni mbaya, utaanza kubleed. So chenye nilifanya nilikuwa nimewekwa mipira kwa mdomo ya oxygen na ingine nikajaribu kuvuta na mwambie iwezekani. So nilikuwa najaribu kukata hiyo situation. So nikijaribu kukata hiyo situation akaita daktari. Bila ameita daktari akuja akanidunga dawa nikaingia kulala. Kwa hivyo mimi yangu ilianzia hapo. Yaani nilianza kukataa. Nasema inakuwa aje kwamba niko hivyo na unaniambia kwamba eti macho ilikuwa imetoka. So nilikuwa najaribu kudeny hiyo situation.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. Now, ni mengi mmepitia, and we really salute you for, you know, serving this country and going through what you went through and still standing here today to encourage others who wear your shoes. Lucy, just listening to the two gentlemen, I mean, this has been your life's work for a while. So, two different circumstances, but still dealing with PTSD. Explain this to us.
They're really not two different circumstances, right? It's just two people who have undergone an experience and a situation that has overcome the coping mechanisms or the defense mechanisms that naturally exist in all of us in order to help us navigate through life. So there really is no difference. It just depends on how, again, somebody has articulated their symptoms, but also where they are in their road to acceptance and to recovery. That is the only difference. But when it comes to matters of denial, everybody goes through that. When it comes to matters of uncertainty, everybody goes through that. When it comes to matters of doing hurtful, painful, negative things, to be able to cope with the emotional hurt that somebody is feeling or the confusion somebody is experiencing, everybody goes through that, right? So it's not really anything different. The symptoms are not, they're not different from one person to the other. It just depends on the circumstances that I've talked about. And so it's just being able to understand that people need support when they have gone through, you know, drastic experiences, or when they have gone through even minor experiences that, according to them, have overwhelmed their usual coping and defense mechanisms, right? That's when we should be able to offer that support to them. So it's really, there's no difference really.
Okay, in terms of the time frame, Byron says it took a moment there before he came to terms with PTSD, but for Joseph, it was immediate the moment he woke up and found himself in the circumstances he was in. What determines this?
Well, I wouldn't say that PTSD started immediately, right? Because the thing about even the way it is described, post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Yeah. It is after the event. It is not immediately after the event. It builds up. So if you have probably 6 months, for example, then you can be able to make the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. And just by the way, a matter of information, the whole disorder part that is at the end of PTSD is actually now in conversation, because there's a school of thought now that is asking, is it really a disorder if you have a normal reaction from an event that has been traumatizing for you? Or is it a normal reaction and therefore you just call it post-traumatic stress and let it go? That is also something to think about. But PTSD builds up. It starts, I like where Kitumbe has started us from denial. That's where everybody starts from. This can't be happening to me. I reject it. It's not my reality. Because what it forms immediately in somebody's mind is a form of dystopia. Like, how can I be living in this nightmare? I want to go back to the normal things that are familiar to me, that I recognize, that I know how to deal with. I don't know how to deal with, this new thing that is happening to me. And then it builds up to now anxiety, where you realize because you can't be the person you were before, you become nervous about how you will actually perform. You become nervous about how people will accept you, how people will perceive you, whether people will still value you, because you can't be able to do the things that you used to do before. And then it compounds over time, especially when there's lack of support, because now you begin to make up a story about yourself that because of this that has happened, you are now less deserving of understanding, less deserving of compassion, less deserving of even being alive at the extreme. And that's where you find that suicidal ideation is a very, very common thing that happens to people who are in this kind of situations. So PTSD builds up, right? The question is, can it be stopped from happening? Can it be controlled? Does there come a point in somebody's life where we say, oh, now you're free from PTSD? My experience tells me that somebody is never free from PTSD. They only are able to adapt positive coping mechanisms that enable them to be able to live with that traumatic event, for those who actually do survive that event. But it's not a switch that you can switch off and say, now it is done. So it's very important to understand the complexity of it.
And speaking of which, we actually have a question coming through. Remember, our question of the day to you is, do you live with PTSD? Share your experience using that hashtag new normal. And of course, if you know somebody who also lives with this disorder, you can also reach out with their experience on their behalf. And there is a question Andrew Maranga is asking, how will I know that I'm suffering from PTSD? And I think Lucy has been able to answer that, because it comes at a time where you actually start getting the symptoms, as she was saying. But I'd like us to delve further into that. And Byron, for you, you mentioned a couple of things instigated the PTSD. Yes. But what were the symptoms you were dealing with?
In my case, I was a bit withdrawn. That is something that I wasn't as a kid. I think I was a very outgoing person. The world in which I lived in, the parachute regiment, is a very close-knit society of superachievers, and it's you know, and of course very strong personalities, and you can expect such kind of people to be absolutely out there on your face. But I started withdrawing, and that was not me. I started to have you know, a lot of depressing thoughts. I could potentially even talk to my own, you know, brothers and sisters. I can't remember for sure if we ever had that kind of closeness that we had as a family. Born in a large family, 2 brothers, 5 sisters then, now 4. And I can't remember particularly if we had that level of close interaction that we had as kids. The closest I had, and that constantly dragged me out of that, the doldrums, was, you know, my mother. And I'm really proud of David, and you know, Hongera to our mothers. You know, women play a very important part in our lives. So my realization that this was not something that I was meant to be, this is not something that I was potentially designed to be. I'm not an introvert, but you know, I constantly had that. So the company that I had was, you know, as I said, the bottle. And I think I immersed myself deeper and deeper into work. And again, blessing in disguise, they gave it to me. And I'm honored to have been a pioneer for this country's special forces, you know, the epitome of military advancement, for that matter. So yes, that may seem, and experts I think could have to shake a stick at some of these things. But for me, that kind of extreme withdrawal, and of course now seeking company in the bottle was one thing that led me into thinking that this is really not something that was meant to be. My mom told me I wasn't that type of a person. And I think that's fairly much what dragged me out of the doldrums, and it hit me like you know, a thunderbolt, and that's when I started to really have a deep introspection. As to how to chart my path
You
forward.
mentioned that you also suffered from depression.
Yes.
Is it what you're referring to as, you know, being recluse?
I guess so, because, you know, when I went to hostel, and this was by default as well, you know, I didn't particularly walk into a hostel to be treated for, you know, depression. I was suffering from bile palsy. And I remember when I was at Memorial, it flashed around the time a friend of mine, I think he had been diagnosed with, you know, mental health. Ideally, what was said then is, I'm a cheesy. So even the way it was worded then wasn't, I think, appropriate for that matter. So I was called in to be the support system for my friend. Not even my cadet class, class ahead, but we were the closest of friends. I think fairly much because we were, you know, maybe suffering from the same things or something like that. He just loved me and I loved him. So when he was at Memorial, I got a call from his family members and from the doctors, like, oh, he's basically looking for you, he's asking for you. So I went to, and then it's around that time when, you know, I'm going in and they tell me, like, you don't look good. What could be on? And the deepest, you know, they sank me really deep. When, you know, they ask, have you had issues with diabetes? And I'm thinking, I'm potentially the fittest guy I know here. And then they go deeper and deeper and they ask, have you ever done HIV tests? Because some of these things is related to either some viral disease or something like that. And, you know, that hit me really, really hard. So I think I lost it, and my good friend, now deceased, very sadly, committed or basically took his life, set his out on fire, and David passed on much later. Basically, he was chucked on the system for medical grounds. So that sank me deeper and deeper. As he was going through his, you know, the paces of medical attention and all the rest of it. I was out and back into training, because my face, half of my face is still flopping. I'm on drugs, and I'm here thinking, what could be going on? So, I mean, for me, my life then, I honestly can't remember quite a lot that happened during that period, but I remember it was absolutely chaotic. I think the way I just adjusted, I thank God for my brain having weeded off quite a lot of things that went down at that particular point in time. And I embraced a lot of positivity afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Joseph, symptoms tumeziongelea. Wewe ulikupitia nini? Apart from the fact that ulikuwa in denial, nini zingine ilikuwa symptoms ya kujua yenyewe hapo unang'ang'ana na kitu ambaye sio kawaida?
So after nimedungwa dawa, niliingia nikalala. Baadaye nilipoamka, sasa huyo mwenzangu tu tulikuwa naye hapo akaanza narrate the story. Vile tulikuwa kazini huko, vile gari yetu ilianguka. So mimi nikaanza kusikia hiyo story. Usiku ilipofika sasa nimelala, nikaanza kuona hiyo event vile tulikuwa tumeenda kazini na vile sasa gari imefanya nini, imeanguka. Vile imeanguka, nikajaribu kutoka kwa hiyo gari, nikaona kwamba kuna mtu ananiambia, wewe bwana, hebu rudia, kichwa yako umeacha ndani ya gari. Sasa mimi nikasema, kweli gari imeenda na kichwa yangu. So nikajaribu kufuata hiyo gari na sina kichwa. So nilistuka, nikaanza kusweat na nikaanza kuhangaika usiku. Kwa hivyo sikulala. Na the following day tena nikaanza kuangalia kwamba kwa nini kitu kimenitendekea hivyo. So nikaanza kuuliza maswali. Sasa hiyo maswali mimi ninauliza hiyo rafiki yangu. Rafiki yangu yeye ananiambia kwamba vile tuliumia ni kwamba hata yeye mwenyewe alifanya nini, kichwa yake iliumia, lakini yeye alifanyia operation ikatoka. Sasa mimi nikaanza kuuliza kwa nini yake amefanyia imeenda through, lakini mimi bado ninaota kwamba kichwa yangu imebaki kwa gari. So hizo ndoto zilikuwa zinanisumbua sana.
Na sasa wakati huo uliongea na daktari na kakuelewa ni nini ulikuwa una struggle naye, ama ilikuwa muda upi kabla uone ambaye like a psychologist?
Okay. After tumekuwa discharged kutoka kwa hospitali, tulipewa like 2 weeks tukaenda kupumzika nyumbani. So mimi vile nimefika nyumbani tu hivi, so nilienda penye tunaishi ni mtaa. So maswali za kwanza watu walikuwa nauliza, wakati huo hii macho ilikuwa somewhere hapa hivi, ni kurudishwa ilirudishwa. So unasikia mtu anaambia, kwani umeungua? Ama ni kupigwa ngetu ulipigwa na wezi? So mimi niliogopa kushare na wao kwa sababu nilikuwa na avoid zile negative statements walikuwa nasema kwangu. Kwa hivyo mimi sikuwa nataka mtu aseme anything negative kwangu. Nilianza kuwa overprotective. So hizo statements nilianza ku avoid. Mtu akiniuliza kuliendaje, sitaki kuongelea hiyo issue. So ikaendelea hivyo hivyo. After 2 weeks nikarudi kazini. Pia huko kazini kufika tu hivi, wale wenye walikuwa huko wakarudia the same thing, kwamba unajua wewe, sisi ripoti yenye tulipewa kwamba wewe ulifanya nini, ulikuwa umekufa. Kulingana vile ulikuwa umeumia, tuliambiwa macho hakuna, masikio ilikuwa imekatika na kichwa yako ilikuwa. Sasa walikuwa naendelea kudescribe vile mimi niko. So nikasema kwani hao watu mbona wananiambia vitu negative? Mimi sijasikia mtu akiniambia kwamba uko sawa. So mimi kwangu nilikuwa na expect mtu aniambie uko sawa. Si eti umeumia ama vitu kama hizo. So mimi nilianza kuhangaika sana, na hata nikaanza kuoshea na wife. Na wife akaniambia itakuwa tu sawa. Lakini yeye sikuwa na shida na yeye kabisa. Nilikuwa namwambia sasa kwa nini watu. Sasa mimi hata nikimwambia namwambia tu kwa nini watu wananiambia niko hivi na hivi na hivi. Yeye alikuwa ananiambia itakuwa sawa. So kwa muda sasa mimi nilimake conclusion from the word go. Hata sikutaka ushauri. Mimi nilisema kwa sababu mimi kichwa yangu imekaa vile iko, mimi nilijitafutia dawa mwenyewe, nikasema kwamba mimi kichwa mimi nataka ifanywe nini, ishughulikiwe, ibadilishwe ikuwe vile nilikuwa kitambo. Hivyo ndio nilikuwa nimeamua. Yeah.
Okay. Now, Lucy, again, looking at the symptoms, which I even put out on screen, is that there are different kinds, and of course, people are affected in different ways. Which are the most common from what you've seen?
The thing that actually pops to my mind is a spiritual symptom. Spiritual symptom in that people stop believing in positive stories, they stop believing in themselves, they stop believing in other people, they stop believing in a higher power, right? Because I want to talk about these symptoms, you know, they're spiritual, they're physical, they're psychological, they're physiological as well, they are relational, they are social. So that would be the first symptom I would talk about, that it's like spiritually people become absent and there is a huge shadow of doubt in themselves and what their life is and what other people's role is in their life. And that is what actually pushes people into experiencing, you know, these elements that are like cognitive challenges, the way they begin to perceive themselves, the way they begin to perceive the world and other people. And like I said, they make up a story that now they continue building up on, that depresses their mood, that makes them sad, that takes joy away from their lives, that becomes a problem for them to even take pleasure in simple things like even taking a bath or eating or socializing. It becomes this thing that now begins to show physically, because somebody will either lose a lot of weight or probably they'll gain a lot of weight. Somebody who was probably once extroverted and you've had this a lot becomes withdrawn, spends a lot of time, not just in the house, but in bed. Yeah. Never opens the curtains, never accepts calls, never goes out to meet people again. And then you just notice that withdrawal becomes there. But at the same time, the same person is also drinking heavily. The same person is also having this sex life that is so adventurous, but it doesn't have any form of control, or it's not informed by relationship. It's just informed by the idea of wanting to confirm, am I still alive? It's like you're pinching yourself. I want to feel something to remind myself I'm still alive. And of course, when now this continues for a while and somebody realizes there actually is no change, and if the support system is so bad, which is what is in the disciplined forces, you know, you don't have somebody coming to you and saying, how is your heart today? Nobody, you know, about that. So you're just like, you're going through something, you'll get over it. So when there's that lack of support and somebody continues to deteriorate. But at the same time, you also have to perform. So you have somebody else who is going to show up just to be seen, whether it's a parade, whether it's at work, whether it's to perform a certain task, and then immediately withdraw, right? And then over time, you just come to that point where you wake up in the morning and you're being told, so-and-so has done A, B, C, D, has basically self-harmed, right? And everyone is like, oh my gosh, the other day, I should have known when I saw A, B, C, D. So in retrospect is when people begin to see that there were breadcrumbs in how this person was conducting themselves, how they were speaking, how they were associating, how they were dressing, how they were communicating with other people, what they were even doing in terms of even how they were doing their jobs. But when it's happening, we are sort of absent from it. Sometimes I feel like it's like we don't want to identify with it because it will remind us that we are probably going through the same thing. And just like the other person, we don't have a solution either. And probably that is why there's a lot of absence from the difficulties that people might be going through. But just specific to the disciplined forces, I want to say that what has been the greatest hindrance is that, agreed, we have a generation in leadership that probably has no regard for mental health, that has no exposure or sensitivity to the fact that somebody's thoughts and feelings can actually lead them down a destructive path. And as much as it may look like it's by choice, it is actually not by choice. Because one thing about trauma is that it turns you into a zombie. You do things when you're absent from yourself. There's a whole lot of disassociation and depersonalization when it comes to trauma. So you have somebody saying to you that, you know what you signed up for, right? You have even the Constitution being quoted at disciplined forces, because there is a section that talks about the freedom and rights that once you get into the military that you lose. There's even a clause that says you lose the right to have a conscience, right? So I think when it comes to disciplined forces, it's important to understand one of the hindrances is that even in the Constitution, there is a clause that is there to ensure that your rights as a human beings are stripped. And therefore that dehumanization, there's a rubber stamp to it because it is in the Constitution, it is what has been culture and tradition, it is what we have decided is the definition of somebody who is supposed to remain strong. And therefore, being able to bring humanity to people suffering, because of course, signing up is voluntary, but bringing humanity to people suffering is critical. Because if you're to voice the idea that you are feeling suicidal, that is an immediate, that's my cat. I'm so sorry.
No worries. Working from home, we totally understand. And actually, I think the cat has just saved me on this one because...
oh my gosh, he always tries to be like part of my meetings and all.
All right, we'll get back to you right after this short break, even as we talk more about the support systems, especially in the uniformed or disciplined forces. We take a short break at this point. Remember, our question of the day to you is, are you living this reality? What is your experience with PTSD? That hashtag is new normal, and you can also reach us using those numbers at the bottom of your screen. We'll be right back.
Akili, 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 akili. Let's chase the germs away. Let's chase the germs away by keeping our hands clean. And when you want to sneeze or when you want to cough, do it in your elbow. Let's practice sneezing into your elbow. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Achoo! Again. Achoo! Yay! You did it! Germs, germs, germs. They make us sick. Germs, germs, germs are not our friends. Germs, germs, germs. They make us sick. Germs, germs, germs. Germs, germs, germs are not your friends.
10 p.m.
Ni super poa kuvaa barakoa. Ni super poa kuvaa barakoa. Je, unajua kwamba mtu yeyote mwenye umri wa miaka 6 au zaidi anaweza kuwa superhero kwa kuvaa barakoa? Ndiyo kabisa, anaweza. Kama hujafikisha miaka 6, usijali. Wewe pia unaweza kuwa superhero kwa kuwakumbusha ndugu zako na wazazi wako wavae barakoa zao. Kuvaa barakoa kunasaidia kujilinda wewe na kuwalinda wengine dhidi ya virusi. Ni super poa kuvaa barakoa.
I went around, I talked to different people, I look at the market, I look at the economy, I look at the trends in Kenya, I read lots of Euro monetary reports, and what I actually found that there was a need for a powerful and effective skincare line in Kenya. Gosh, to be honest, I was really bad. I didn't do so much work on the accounting. But within 2 years, I was like, gosh, you've messed, eh? It's not just about the money, it's the solutions. I see the market as a cake. There's a slice for everyone. As long as I do a great job, as long as I deliver.
Invest in the prime plots from Finca Properties Limited, Equator Gardens, Nanyuki, a gated community ready for immediate development. We also have Konza Suburbs, a gated community within Konza Metropolis. For details, call us today. Finca Properties Limited, prime and affordable.
Thank you for staying with Your World. My name is Gladys Gachanja. Today we are focusing on post-traumatic stress disorder, abbreviated as PTSD, particularly amongst the uniformed or disciplined forces. And we still have Byron Adera, who is a pioneer ex-Kenya Special Forces officer, with us in studio. In the other studio, Joseph Gitumbe, who is an ex-KDF officer. And of course, joining us virtually is Major Retired Lucy Mukiria. Thank you all for staying with us and being very candid about your journeys. And Byron, when we think about what we have been, the intricacies of living with PTSD, definitely there comes a time where you also have to be the one who accepts there's a problem. True. And you need help. When did that happen for you?
Thanks, Gladys. For me, I missed out on the help. I think back in the day when the army was grappling with, people going through some of these things. As I said, my friend, and quite a few individuals, I think, that came before me, or people served alongside myself, were branded other things other than what, it was. So no one called it PTSD, no one called it a mental health a challenge, for that matter. You are branded either of our domestics or, he's unfit to serve. And truly, a lot of people got, dismissed from the system, let's say, or got terminated from the system on grounds of being medically unfit to serve. And so to where? That's exactly what happened to my good friend, who a few years later, I set his house on fire. And, with about 94% burns, I got to hear about it a year later from his sisters, and brother, because we didn't keep in touch, that he basically took his own life. So, the realization was there. And in my case, as I said, I looked at myself and I said, this is not me. And it took a call from my mother, who said, and at that point in time, my family was falling apart. Quite a few articles have been written about that situation, the Lonesome Soldier, Bala, and Namu back in the day. And so for me, it took my mom telling me that I didn't lose anything. I was not a loser. And she did say that, we know you love your son. And I know he is going to be there. She gave me an example, and she said, the President of the United States, he came back the other day to check on his biological dad, so he's going to be there. He's going to be there. So you are not a loser to let this go, because that was something that I kept constantly going back to, and it was something that kept driving me deeper and deeper into depression and into very chaotic kind of life that, of course, now mixed up with Miami life, which was elitist for that matter. So again, it was, things tagging in completely opposite directions. At work, you are, among the finest of operators here. And I was excelling. It's in my nature to seek and always pursue excellence. And for that, I'd say I did. And then on the other side, things are absolutely chaotic. On that other side as well, my personal life, beyond the face and the uniform and beyond the chaos at home, I'm withdrawn. I'm, having the company and quite a lot of stuff that Major Retired Mukuria has alluded to. That was practically me. So you can imagine the chaos. So the realization came when my mom just, called and she said, I understood what went down in Nairobi. Things fell apart, and I understand that you are really broken. I understand you let go of, those family members, but I'm going to be here.
When did you start seeking help?
I did not seek for help. If anything, you'd be hiding. The system, as it was then, and that's the fact, was punitive. And I said you'd be branded off our domestics. You should be fixing stuff, but they are left unfixed. You have a home front that's literally on fire, but it can be fixed. You can't be the guy who's constantly leaving work as well to go fix what's, falling apart at home, and that impacts you as well. And it gets to really, bottle up and it's just waiting for that point where it blows off, right? So that is happening, and there's not so much you can do. The system demands that you perform at the peak levels. And for that matter, the country was basically just having the first batch of Special Forces operators, for which I was literally the first person to be nominated as an officer to undertake the same. So you are engrossed on this and making it work as perfectly as possible. But the people that are around you and who you also want to put up a brave face, for, are either not optimized to see what should actually happen, even for themselves. So that level of awareness didn't have the structure or the infrastructure, for that matter, to come out. So, as I said, you could be a gang of people, tens of people, but you are fighting very individual wars and independent wars, and that's what happened to us. I wished people just lived simple, that others may simply live. In my case, the chaos was compounded by, I think, what Major Mukuria, as retired, has alluded to, the lack of the systems and perhaps the lack of realization on the part of the people that perhaps came before us or maybe was there as commanders, to have jumped into the deepest end of the pool with us and said, hey, this. But again, I'm not blaming them, because ideally this is something that was new. And maybe other people were going through the same, but it didn't even have a name for people to shake a stick at it and say, hey, this is what's going on and this is how we can come in to help.
So a lot of ignorance was at play.
Definitely, yes.
Okay, we understand that we have a phone call, Fred, from Ahero. What is your question or comment?
I'm Fred Aim from Ahero. Thank you for allowing me to join you. Actually, I know Byron, you were with him in college, in high school, and I know what he's gone through. What my comment is that this syndrome doesn't, this disorder doesn't just affect the guys who are with the forces alone. It affects a vast number of people. Yep. The people associated with them. Because it's something that is infectious. Because one, people struggle so much to join the forces, and then there's so much expectations from the people who are in the forces, and then these people live a life that is not even natural. I have a brother who retired from the forces. That's not actually. But just like you described, Dr. described that they act like zombies. It's very difficult, to bring these people back to the normal life that we live. And, in our family, we expect my brother to be the one who is handling most of our family issues. He chairs the meeting and he doesn't understand anything. So how do we bring back these people who are retired from the forces back to the normal life that everybody else is living? How do we do that?
We hear you, Fred, and thank you for sharing your experience too through your own brother. And at this point, we also take some of your feedback coming to us on social media. Remember, the question is, do you have an experience with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or do you know somebody who has experienced the same? What is that experience? Helios Isaboke says, maybe yes, like after a fatal accident, the fear and hysteria of going through the same experience worries you even when you're inside a car. It happens, you have to accept it and deal with it. Eventually, it will go away gradually. Helios, what Lucy is saying is that there is a help for this. It's just that people do not know that you can actually get help for it. Dennis Odiego says it's real and killing our brothers and sisters. The government needs to take care of the citizens in uniform. Dennis, thank you for writing in. And again, that hashtag is new normal and you can reach us using those numbers at the bottom of your screen. Now, Joseph ulisema ulihangaika baada ya kurudi nyumbani na bado unaendelea na kazi. Maisha yamebadilika sababu ya vile sura inakaa, lakini ukaenda ukapata usaidizi, ukatengezwa. Lakini ulifika wapi? Ni wakati upi sasa uliona sasa lazima mtu atembee na wewe, especially kukusaidia na impact ya your mental health?
Okay. Mimi niko na mtoto mdogo sasa anaenda 10 years. Na huyo mtoto alikuwa anapenda kuja kukaa karibu na mimi. Hata ukiona hii macho vile iko na mwanya hapa hivi. Ni yeye aliniangalia akaniambia, "Kidadi, umeumia sana." Sasa kulikuwa na maganda iko hapo hivi. Kwa mara tu akavuta hiyo maganda, akasema hii dudu imekusumbua sana. So vile alifanya hivyo damu ikatoka. So vile alifanya hivyo mamake akamchapa akamwambia, unajua umeumiza baba yako. So wakati amefanya hivyo mimi nikarudi kufanya nini? Kurudi kulala. So nikaanza kujiuliza maswali mengi. Ni kwa nini hii kitu kinafanya hata mtoto anataka kuja kucheza na mimi, hawezi kucheza na mimi? So nilianza kukua na ile self defense. Mimi sitaki mtu akuje karibu na mimi. Na pia a lot of negativity zenye nilikuwa naambiwa ilikuwa inafanya mimi naanza kujihurumia, self pity. Naona kweli kwa watu wote askari tulikuwa nao ndani huko, kwa hiyo nani penye tulikuwa, kwa nini mimi ndio nimeumia peke yangu? Wengine wameshapona, wamerudi kazini. Pia nilikuwa nacheza handball, nilikuwa hata kwa national team. So mimi wakati waenda kutrain nilikuwa naenda kukaa huko, nawaambia simunipe namba nicheze, wananiambia hapana, wewe ni mgonjwa. So nikaona ni kama nimeanza kukataliwa. Haya, huko kazini penye nilikuwa nimekuwa deployed kufanya kazi, nawaambia mimi ninasikia nifanye kazi. Wanasema hapana, daktari amesema usifanye kazi fulani. So mimi nilikuwa narudi nyumbani, nikaanza kujitenga, nikaanza kulala. Hiyo kulala, hata wife akiniletea chakula mimi nilikuwa nakataa. Huyo mtoto alikuwa anapenda kucheza na mimi, angekuja kwa bed. Akuja kucheza na mimi lakini namkataza. Hata sometimes ningesukuma yeye nikamwambia sitaki kelele. So mimi hiyo kujitenga na kukaa peke yangu na kukosa kukula chakula, hata ilifika masuala ya bedroom. Sawa, si nilikuwa nimeoa. So singefanya anything. So pia hiyo ikaanza kuleta some kutoelewana na wife. So hiyo kitu nikaanza kuona mimi sasa kama hata kwa familia sifanyi kitu, mtoto ndio anataka nifanye kitu lakini hakuna chenye nafanya. Nikienda kazini naambiwa wewe ni mgonjwa. Nikitaka kwenda sports nicheze na wengine wananiambia wewe hapana. Nikaanza kuona nimetengwa na mimi nikaanza kujitenga.
Okay.
So vile nimejitenga sasa kuna hasira ilianza kupanda peke yangu. So nikijaribu kushare wananiambia wewe wacha kuwa kama mwanamke, you are a soldier. A soldier inafaa ukwe strong. So mimi nilianza sasa kuacha sishei na mtu, nikakaa nao ndani yangu. Lakini sasa nikifika kwa nyumba nilikuwa natoa kwa familia. Nasikia? Sasa mimi nilikuwa natafutanga makosa, hata kama amefanya kitu kidogo, sijawahi mchapa, lakini ile maneno ningemtolea ilikuwa inamchoma sana. So hiyo maneno yenyewe ndio ilifanya hata yeye mwenyewe akachoka, akafanya nini? Akajitoa. Lakini sasa wakati nimenotice kwamba ninafanyia maneno, so ndio ikabidi nikafanya nini? Nienda kuelezea daktari wangu. Lakini mimi nilienda kwa daktari wangu tayari nimeshafanya conclusion. Mimi conclusion yenye nilikuwa nimeamua kufanya ni kwamba mimi hii kichwa ndio sababu ya kila kitu mimi kutendeka. Ndio imefanya nimetengwa, sipewi kazi, ninaambiwa mimi hata sifanyi anything. Sasa ilibidi mimi nikaambia tu daktari. Kwanza huyu Meja Mkuria though alikuja baadaye, nilikuwa nimeshafanya solution mimi, walifanya vile wanaweza kubarisha hii kichwa. Mimi ilifikia sehemu sasa sitaki kichwa. Sasa wakasema tutakufanyia plastic surgery. Lakini daktari akasema ile level yenye wamefanya ni hapo tu. Sasa mimi sikujikubali kabisa.
Okay.
Yeah.
Na uliweza kuona Meja Mkuria ama psychologist at what point?
Wao walikuja tuseme after 2 months sasa, wakati nimeanza kuambia issue. Mimi mwenyewe unasikia ninakwambia nilikuwa bado sijakubali kwamba niliumia. Nilikuwa nasema kwamba hii kitu haiwezi kufanyika hivyo. Mimi nataka nirudi ile hali yangu ya kwanza, ya kufanya sports, ya kufanya kazi na kwenda hata kubeba bunduki kufanya na wengine. Lakini sasa unastukia hata leader mwenye ako hapo anasema kwamba si wewe wa kwanza kuumia. Hiyo kitu iliniumiza sana. Nikasema wewe ni leader wetu. Sasa si kumwambia kimoyoni, nikasema huyu ni leader wetu. Baadaye ni encourage, ananiambia kuna wenye wameumia. Tumeona hata mwenye amegongwa na ndege na gurudumu iko kwa mwili wake. Mimi nafikiri unajua gurudumu ya ndege. Hiyo gurudumu ya ndege inaweza kaje kwa mwili wa mtu. Hiyo iliniumisha sana. So nikaamua kuanzia siku hiyo nikablame jeshi. Nikablame wenye tulienda nao kazini. Hata wao wanajeshi wenye tulikuwa nao nikamwambia, sasa mimi wakati nilikuwa naumia mbona hamkunisaidia? Kwa hivyo mimi niliblame kila mtu hapo. So mimi nilimake conclusion, mimi tukienda kwa daktari ni wanirudishe fenye nilikuwa. Si eti waniambie, hata psychologist alikuwa anakuja hapo kuniongelesha, namwambia wewe daktari, nitasikiza story zako. After hii sura yangu imefanya nini? Imerudi vile ilikuwa. Kwa hivyo kwa sababu nyinyi ndio mlinifanya nikaumia hivyo. Na mmeanza kuniambia si mimi wa kwanza kuumia. Kwa hivyo mimi kwanza ndio tuongee na nyinyi. Nataka kichwa yangu irudi vile ilikuwa, ikuwe hii side vile iko. So wao walisema sasa tutakufanyia aje na kichwa iko hivyo. So nikawaambia kama mtanibadilishia hii kichwa na mimi nitafanya nini? Nitajifanyia mwenyewe. So hapo ndio ilifikia, ndio wife na yeye sasa hiyo hasira na sitaki kuongea na wao. Unajua alikaa na mimi niliumia 2013, sawa? 2014, 2015. Karibu 3 years alichoka na mimi. Lakini sasa yeye hakuniambia kwamba ameenda. Alinidanganya tu kwamba acha niende kuona aunti yangu ni mgonjwa. Kumbe ndio alikuwa anafanya nini?
Anaenda. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sasa wacha tufike hapo kwa sasa. And I mean, Lucy, listening to this, clearly you can see that the effects of PTSD are not only on the person who's gone through the trauma, but also the ripple effects are felt far and wide. And going by the stories that we come across even on the media, it is a fact that the effects are they are more alive around where this patient, if you may call them, or the person living with this condition is a part of the bigger village, that is.
Yeah, I want to really take a breath and ground myself as I respond to this, because I'm really carrying with me women, wives who are in great pain and suffering because of the pain and suffering of their husbands who are in uniform. And I really want to make sure I represent them accordingly, widows included, because I think that is the one voice that is not being heard, mostly because they are afraid. They are afraid that if they speak out, it will endanger the jobs for their husbands who are in uniform. They are afraid that their husbands may lose their jobs. They are afraid that they will not get a pension. They are afraid that they will not get medical benefits. They are afraid that the stigma around mental illness will be used to expel them, not just from the legitimate position they hold in society and in their families, but also amongst their children. And this is a very critical issue, because what it has done is that it has really forced these women to draw into themselves, and this has curtailed their ability to perform to their full potential in such detrimental ways that I think the impact of it cannot even be understood until maybe their children have children, And this is the problem with the kind of suffering that is happening right now, that it is being carried by wives, mothers, sisters, and then it is being passed on to the children unconsciously and without the intention of wanting to hurt them. But if you are in a position where you cannot fully articulate yourself, express yourself, or even receive validation after doing that, and instead be asked to kuvumilia ama omba tu itaisha, ama what makes you special, every other person is going through that, kwa nini hauko kama bibi ya nani, kama mama nani, that just lack of validation of what people are going through, based on this framework that clearly is a problem and it's not being able to work. And what is so disturbing is that men in uniform are being expelled because the system can no longer deal with their desire to kill themselves, their desire to kill other people that, is outside of the rules of engagement. Because the system can no longer deal with somebody who is threatening suicide and homicide, they are expelled to their families and their societies. So the question here begs, if you can't deal with them, how are wives, mothers, sisters equipped to deal with them? To be honest, the soldiering is not like what you see in the movies. There's no pleasantries about killing people. It is bloody, it is dirty, it is a stain on the soul. And it does impact how people carry themselves and how they feel about themselves and understand the world. And so if somebody is coming out of that with the inability to feel safe once again, to feel like they trust themselves or where they are at, it poses a huge danger because they will, one way or another, in pursuant of regaining that sense again, do everything they can to try and get it back. And sometimes it is counterproductive because we are also not giving a lot of emphasis on human beings as emotional beings. We've decided we are going to deny that part of ourselves, but in the process, it gains more power in that it is what drives us and it is driving us unconsciously. And then we are left saying, what happened there?
Yeah.
You know? So mothers, wives, they need a lot of support. They are in big, big trouble. They are doing the best that they can, and their best cannot be able to change these men who have had their minds, their emotions, and their souls broken by nature of the job that they do.
We hear you, and at this point, we take another short break on Your World. When we come back in October of last year, there was a wellness center that was actually set up for the KDF to help along with this process, rehabilitation and all. Question is it helping? Is it here a little bit too late for those that were here before? Or is this the step in the right direction? We'll be right back.
England versus Germany, Tuesday, 29th June at 7 p.m.
Coming big in Star Times. Get connected today for only $9.99 aerial decoder and $2,699 satellite dish.
Star Times. Enjoy digital life.
Malaria ni ugonjwa hatari sana unaoua watu wengi hapa Kenya. Japo kuko na korona, hatari ya malaria bado iko. Mtoto huyu alikuwa na joto jingi, kutetemeka, kuumwa na viungo na uchovu. Alikimbizwa hospitali ya umma ambako sheria za COVID-19 huzingatiwa na ni salama kwa shughuli ya upimaji. Vipimo vilionyesha kuwa ana malaria na papo hapo daktari akampa dawa za malaria na kumshauri azimalize, na ili kujikinga wawe wakilala ndani ya neti iliyotibiwa. Malaria husambazwa na mbu. Walio hatarini ni watoto wa chini ya miaka 5 na akina mama wajawazito. Kupimwa na kutibiwa ni bure katika hospitali zote za umma. Usisahau adui malaria. Zero malaria huanza na mimi. Chukua jukumu leo. Komesha malaria. Ujumbe huu umeletwa kwenu na Wizara ya Afya.
Ensure your children and those around you aged 9 months to 59 months do not miss out. Vaccinate to protect. This message has been brought to you courtesy of the Ministry of Health in conjunction with UNICEF.
Fresh fried ginger has ginger oil, which is good for a healthy living lifestyle. It combines wonderfully on salads, stir-fries, when basted on roasted meat, or simply sprinkled on your favorite dish. Now available in 250 ml, 500 ml, and 1 liter.
We have moved. The Nation Media Group Kisumu office is now located at Mega Plaza along Oginga Odinga Street, Wing A on the 6th floor.
Contact our customer care desk for more details on 0719 038931 for assistance.
David and I love each other so much. And that is the reason we're getting married, so we can finish uniting the beautiful family that we are.
No, and it really hurts that David still hasn't realized the kind of garbage that you are.
It's a bit complicated for me.
This is not the life that you promised me.
It's your fault we're here, Perla.
Mine?
Yes. You trusted Carito, so now you have to face the consequences.
Along came love.
Yummy. I know. Nitamu. It's no surprise. The good quality baked bread from Bol A is festive good. Chukua yako moja leo.
Thank you for staying with your world. My name is Gladys Gachanja. This morning, we're talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, specifically in the disciplined or uniformed forces. A lot of truths have been said here, and candidness has also been shared here. And we really salute you guys for being part and parcel of this conversation. We're still with Major Retired Lucy Mukuria joining us virtually. She is a psychologist. Joseph Gitumbe, who is an ex-KDF officer, and of course Byron Adera, who is a pioneer ex-Kenya Special Forces officer. Before we get back to that conversation, let's take a look at the other world. Now, the coal-fired tandoor oven sends a mouth-watering scent wafting through the Mumbai kitchen. A celebrity chef, Saransh Goyla, maker of the world's best butter chicken, according to MasterChef Australia, takes a break from COVID-19 relief efforts and resumes work. Although the pandemic has done little to slow the global appetite for his delivery-only signature dish, business has been the last thing on his mind of late, with India battling a brutal second wave of infections.
You are cooking, butter chicken. One very, very important thing that I tell people is to add dairy, which is cream and butter, towards the end and not before, because that gives you that fresh buttery aroma and it gives you that fresh creaminess. From the start was always focused on deliveries and takeaway. So in that sense, our loss of revenue and a loss of business was slightly lesser than an average restaurant. COVID Meals for India is a non-profit initiative that was started by me and my team to try and help few people who were COVID patients stuck at home and who didn't have a home meal service, or didn't have any of their friends, family, relatives or neighbors to help them out with meals. The initiative started with about 200 volunteers across 20 cities who wanted to help COVID patients all across the country. And it grew to about 4,000 volunteers in 400 cities in about 4 weeks. Delicious. So this is one of those dishes that makes India proud, and I wanted to give it my own spin and my own recipe. And that's the reason I created Goila Butter Chicken. It's a chef's take on what a butter chicken can be and should be. I do feel like today's consumer is very, very health conscious, and yes, they don't like to eat as much cream and butter in their food. So our butter chicken actually has half the dairy and half the butter and cream of what the original recipe has. And that's the reason I feel it fits well with the consumer because it's sort of a healthy, I can't call it healthier, but it's a guilt-free version of butter chicken.
Very, very nice tandoori there. Clearly, life is going back to normal slowly, albeit slowly, in India. Now, the players who dominated Wimbledon over the past 3 decades may have changed from Pete Sampras and Steffi Graf to Roger Federer and Serena Williams, but one feature has remained constant: the supplier of its trademark strawberries. Hugh Low Farm, situated near Maidstone in Kent, the county known as the Garden of England, has been the sole supplier of the fruit so closely associated with the Grand Slam event for almost 30 years.
Strawberries have always been very closely associated with Wimbledon, with the Wimbledon fortnight, because the traditional English strawberry season always peaked at the end of June. I think that the reason that they like to get their strawberries from us is because we're so close to London. So we're actually, I mean, some of our fields you can actually see Canary Wharf from the fields and the Shard and everything. So we're very close to London. So the strawberries are very fresh. It's a very important order in the 2 weeks that the championships are on, but of course we're supplying over many, many weeks, and we do have other customers. But to us, the Wimbledon order is absolutely pivotal because it is so high profile. It makes you realise that people from all over the world are eating your strawberries, so it does rather focus the mind, slightly nerve-wracking, and a very high-profile strawberry outing.
Now, elsewhere, thousands of South Korean music fans attend a concert in Seoul as large-scale music events return to the country under eased COVID restrictions. South Korea this month announced that it is easing some restrictions as a vaccination drive gathered pace in June, with over 15 million people, close to 30% of the population, receiving at least their first shot at the weekend. Now, large music events have restarted. However, attendees must complete a rapid COVID test with a saliva sample that can deliver a result in around 10 minutes.
재밌게 보다 가시면 좋을 것 같고요. 저희는 저 물만 마시고.
So back to our conversation of the day. PTSD is still in studio. Byron Joseph, and of course joining us virtually, Major Retired Lucy Mukire, who is a psychologist. And when we went to break, I made mention that in October of last year, the KDF actually set up a wellness center that is bound to take care of the soldiers who are facing PTSD, and of course serve as a rehabilitation center in the process. And it is based at the Langata Barracks, and it was actually unveiled by the Commander-in-Chief. And I'm just wondering, Byron, having walked in these shoes and now living with your reality, do you think if this wellness center was there before, things would have turned out different?
Absolutely, yes. I do agree that things would have turned out a bit different, yes. Maybe quite profoundly so. And to some extent, I mean, basic elementary physics talks about the basic laws of action-reaction. A part of going to war means that things would happen. And those things that will happen inadvertently get to change people. And you'd almost always expect people to be impacted in several ways. There's sincerely not so much of an excuse with regards to how the processes thereof and the reaction for that matter in terms of people suffering from mental illnesses of sorts was taken care of. Because, you know, wars have been fought the world over. We've had World Wars I, II, and some of the countries with which we've actually operated alongside or fought this, especially the global war on terror. I'm humbled and happy to have participated in Somalia since its onset. Have a lot of lessons that have been learned over time. Yes, PTSD and the mental illnesses are also new to them, and sincerely so. But I feel that the adjustment with which a leadership, not just the army, but I mean in the contemporary life in general, the way we adjust to things that affect us, and truth be told, change is the only constant in life, and so we shouldn't be shocked that things are happening and things are changing. That's going to be happening. So I feel that the mental adjustment and a leadership that cares and needs to move with speed and to right some wrongs is absolutely vital for, you know, not just the army but organizations as well, because we are a community of people. undeniably, organizations can have equipment and all sorts of things with which men work. But the most vital and the most important piece or factor within that game plan is actually the people. So the investment is a welcome one, and I'm really happy that that is happening. And but it ought to have come at a better time. Some of us may have benefited from the same, but you know, the most important thing as well is if this facility would be good enough and to open its doors to other people that have had to fall out along the way, or gotten themselves dismissed maybe on medical grounds. I so wish that even some of the litigations, for that matter, internal ones that let go of people on, say, medical grounds or on grounds of gross indiscipline, as it was, you know, spelled out then, it can be relooked, and people can say, hey, there must be something that we missed here. The conditions did not warrant us to slap this level of you know, punitive measures, let's say dismissals or something like that, because as Mukuri has basically said, we are a burden to the society in which we live that probably are even worse, you know, worse placed to deal with people who are not, who change in adverse ways and who are not able to adjust, you know, rather even automatically as expected into the civilian life. Because I mean, the army breaks you from that civilian into a military practitioner, for that matter. So it's not by a switch like that for people to get back. It takes a lot of mental effort. I had to invest quite some you know, energies and mental resilience and strength to get myself out of those doldrums, literally pulling myself by my bootstraps.
Speaking of which, did you ever seek help professionally after leaving the service?
None at all. None at all. For me, it's been a case of, I feel I could let go of that opportunity for someone else who was placed. That is how I looked at myself. And I said, if I've had the little bit of power and I'm able to still grind forward, I mean, I sought solace in books, and literally I've really had to invest in a physical library. And I sought, in my journey of self-realization, I had to really, you know, identify with positivity. That was, for me, the foundation. But beyond, I had to more like self-educate, and in that way, I've had to really self-discover. Fairly much. I feel, and this is not to downplay the importance of professional help, and someone out there that's listening to me shouldn't be discouraged from going down that road. But if you find yourself in a region where you can invest so much in self-awareness and self-discovery and identify with positivity and let go of bitterness and resentment and all this negativity, it is a good place to be.
So we said you cannot be cured of PTSD, but that's how you found a way to actually cope with those relapses, if you may call them so.
Absolutely, yes. But that is not to say that I haven't had situations. I've you know, had less than 2 years, perhaps. I had situations of panic attacks and all the rest of it. You know, in the middle of the night, you're waking up by a pool of sweat and stuff like that. It happened.
Okay.
But then again, the acceptance, and this is critical. The self-acceptance that what is happening is absolutely normal, and that's the debate that Major Mukuri is perhaps alluding to. So for me, I took this within my stride, and when they do happen, I treat myself to that realization that this is absolutely normal, and this is what I read somewhere, and this is how I'm going to craft my paths going forward.
Okay. Joseph, kwako je, ushawahi ona psychologist wakati ulitoka sasa KDF na wewe sasa ni actually evangelist, si ndio? Uliwahi ona daktari wa kukusaidia na hizi thoughts ama unadilaje?
Tuliendelea na Meja Mukuria because yeye ndiye aliletwa mara ya mwisho wakati sasa mimi nimeinsist kichwa ikatwe. Sasa yeye ndiye aliletwa huko, lakini sasa ameletwa wakati hata KDF wameshaamua mimi nisimamishwe kazi. So yeye alikuja tu dakika ya mwisho ndiye akaanza kunipea matumaini. In fact, mimi nilisimama tu nikate kichwa, lakini akaniambia ukikatwa kichwa hutakuwa na kichwa, lakini let me teach you something very special. Akaanza kunifunza prayer ingine inaitwa serenity prayer. Serenity prayer. So akanifunza jinsi ya kuomba, nikaanza kuomba. Sasa hiyo prayer akaniambia ukisikia tu umefika mwisho unaweza omba hiyo prayer. Sawa sawa. So yeye ndiye alianza kunifanya kuwa positive. lakini sasa wakati nimesimamishwa kazi nilipewa barua imeandikwa unfit for the service, sawa sawa, na mke naye ameenda, na mimi sasa nimesimamishwa nikiwa very sick, nilikuwa very bitter. So mimi nilikuwa nataka kufanya revenge wenye walinisimamisha kazi na hata madaktari, because hata niliuliza nani amesema nisimamishwe kazi. Sasa huko wakasema ni daktari ndio walisema wewe ni mgonjwa, sawa sawa. So mimi nilishindwa kuelewa ni nini inaendelea. So nili lose hope. So nikitaka kufanya mambo na kufanya revenge, ndio hiyo thought yenye Madam Mukuri alikuwa ameniambia about ukifika mwisho uombe hiyo prayer. So nikakumbuka kwamba sasa niko very bitter. Hata wakati huo nilikuwa na shake na tetemeka na machozi natoka. Kwa hivyo nikasema hii prayer siwezi nikaomba. So nikaenda tu kanisa ilikuwa tu karibu hapo, inaitwa Redeemed Gospel Church. So nikapata daktari pastor hapo akaniombea. So after kuniombea nikawa na peace. Sasa hiyo peace nilipopata ndio nikapewa advice kwamba sasa unajua sasa Mungu ako na mpango na wewe juu ya maisha yako. Sasa tunakuadvise ujoin classes evangelism, zitakusaidia, zitakupea hope. So Madam Kuria kila wakati alikuwa anafanya follow up na mimi. Sasa akaendelea kunifanyia counseling. Akanotice kwamba kuna vitu ambavyo anafaa nisaidie, nijielewe mimi, myself worthy. So alitembea na mimi mpaka hata sasa hivi anaendelea. Na pia kwa hiyo evangelism nikaenda Bible school fulani hapo, na hiyo Bible school imekuwa ikinisaidia sana, na niko na mentors ambao wamenisaidia kusimama kabisa.
Okay, sawa sawa. And clearly, Lucy, just listening to Joseph, there is positive impact in seeking therapy through this process. But as Byron says, he found a way to walk this journey by finding positivity and purpose in life. What normally is your focal point when you are dealing with these men and women in uniform?
I think just fast about Byron, I just want to mention that when you sit close to the fire, you don't need a match, right? I've spent a lot of time. I've spent a lot of time with both gentlemen, and of course, Byron will attest that we have gotten into very serious and deep and very personal conversations. And so sometimes, even if the session is not charged, just because you're not paying for it, it doesn't mean that it's not a session that you're getting. Okay, just so you know. But what I think is important about what he's saying is that when, PTSD is it's a collective of very many symptoms, as you had, ranging from depression to alcohol use disorder, to erectile dysfunction, to depersonalization. And there is therefore no one size fits all, right? And it's important to get into a process that helps you to know what your groove is, to know what is working for you, to be able to preserve you and to advance your growth and healing in the process, because that is what it is all about. So coming to my story and my situation, I was the only psychologist in the KDF for like 10 years. Like I was employed one day, and it was 10 years before somebody else was employed. And therefore, I was able to, work in the hospital, work in disaster management. I was able to teach, to build curriculum, to recruit, to go through processes of basically logistics and administration. I ended up in the theater of war. I mean, I usually feel like I lived 10 lifetimes in the military. And that's why I'm always like, hey, my pension was earned for sure. So I'm saying this to be able to communicate to you that I know what is under the hood, right? And it is no longer my area of focus as to what exactly happens in the military or what doesn't happen, because there is no news for me there. But what my focus is right now is that what can I do about those who have been expelled, those who have been discharged, those who are now in the process of trying to live their best life, hurting their marriages, hurting their families, hurting the communities that they are in. And if you go back to 2019, on the 1st of August, that is when the petition for a military veterans law was read on the Senate floor. And so from 2019, we are now in 2021. If you go to the Hansard, there is not a single legislator who did not think that it is time that Kenya had a military veterans law. So that process is supposed to take 100 days, where now you are able to table the bill and the process continues to go into law. But we are now in 2021 and the bill is awaiting to be published by the government printers for its first reading. So while that is happening, those who have been expelled continue to languish and to live in very heart-wrenching situations. Some of them are not even alive. And even if those who are not alive did not take their own lives, they have died out of road traffic accidents, liver cirrhosis, strokes, heart attacks. And these are people who are basically within my age range, and it disturbs me greatly. And I just want the understanding that it's not just about providing psychotherapy that will be able to help. There has to be a systemic approach to being able to address this problem that is expected because of the nature of the job. But it is important to recognize that people deserve a life after the military. People deserve a life after a traumatic event, and we should be able to support them because our own survivability depends on them.
We hear you, and I understand we have a caller from Nakuru. Tevin from Nakuru? Calvin? Yes. What's your question or comment?
My comment for the word was
Say that again.
I think that I wanted to comment and also appreciate you for this discussion. But that relating to adherence Madam Lucas.
Okay, I can barely hear you properly, but thank you for calling in. Perhaps you can try again so that we can hear you clearly. But even as we do that, we're bringing this conversation, very informative conversation, to a close. And I'll start off with you, Byron. Having walked the shoes, still your reality. What would you like to encourage comrades?
Well, my heart and my full respect goes out to the men and women in uniform, and this is not limited to the KDF. We have people sharing in the same fate in our sister service, that is the National Police Service. And there's been many cases, and I think they're on the rise right now, unless it's arrested, of people taking their own lives, those to their spouses, and I think the NPS is affected probably even more than what's happening in the KDF. So having said that, it would be, unfair for me to let go of this opportunity to not congratulate the men and women who are doing quite an important job of protecting this country from both internal and external adversaries. That is for the KDF and the National Police Service, respectively. And it would require an intentional, leadership for that matter. And it starts, that's where they say the buck stops, that has the best interest of those that are leading at heart. It starts from there. And then to leverage that with, forward thinking, because as has been said here quite a few times and by all of us, is that we must expect some level of reaction. When you go into a process, then you expect some outcomes. That expectation needs a mind that is alive and is thinking and is investing a genuine interest in the successes of the things that they get themselves involved in, and for that matter, the duty of care. It's that basic for me. And fairness is absolutely important. The system can sometimes invest in people, and this I say with a lot of caution, that probably get themselves to some positions by accident. And those accidents impact the people that are possibly under them for leadership, mentorship, stewardship. My heart goes out there to the most beautiful of the commanders and the leaders that I worked with that would look at me and say, Ade weenda nyumbani usort issues zako, hata sitakutaka kuandikia pass, you know. Informal, yes, but because they invested so much trust in me and they saw something beyond just what we're going through, and I think even then, they had that little bit of care and you know, forward thinking beyond what we are going through. But of course, my optimism is with the fact that the system is waking itself up to the realization that this is something that's very critical, it's important. Men are fighting and within physical bodies, but we all are mental beings trying to live that physical life. So it would be very, very critical for, you know, the people to invest. That I said, if we were to live simple, others will simply live. So the investment in genuine interest in the successes of the organizations that we are in and the care about the people that are helping us to prop these organizations up is very, very critical. Yes.
Okay, and definitely, Joseph, you have been very elaborate about your journey. Joseph, sasa wewe ni evangelist, angalau maisha yako positive, unaendelea every day at a time with some sort of change in how you think in life. Ungetaka kueleza wengine ambao wamepitia yale umepitia vipi? Unanisikia, Joseph?
Hapana.
Aya basi, wacha to sort sauti yako. We'll be back to you in a moment. Lucy, even as we bring this to a close, your words of encouragement, because even as you've been steering others along, you have also had to deal with PTSD yourself.
Yeah, I have. And I think I just want to close by an experience I had with my daughter that is still bringing tears to my eyes. I was talking to her and she said to me, Mom, you know, is everything okay? I heard there's a plane that fell in Kajiado and soldiers were killed. Oh my God, are they okay? Are their families going to be okay?
Yes.
And I just, you know, my daughter really is, you know, she reminds me that children are watching, children are listening, children are registering. But I think she also reminds me that when we recognize that something has happened to somebody and we worry about them, that I think is such a beautiful human part of us, that even if we are not the ones who are going to go and treat them physically, that just our awareness that people need compassion, empathy, and care will just gravitate to how we treat each other and how we physically treat the next person that we come across. And so for me, I thought that was that's the way I would just love to end. That let us mind each other, let's care for each other, let's worry about each other, and let's be there for each other.
Very well said. Joseph, umepitia mengi, sasa wewe ni evangelist, maisha imebadilika. Ungetaka kuencourage wengine ambao wamepitia yale umepitia vipi?
Yes, as an evangelist, ningependa kusema tu kitu kimoja. Kwanza naanza na wenye wako kwa uniformed forces. Naambia kitu kimoja. Hii kasumba ya mtu kusema wewe kaa kisoja, wacha kukaa kama mwanamke, hiyo ni uongo. Hata mwanamke ni mtoto wa Mungu, ako na feeling na hisia. Wewe kama unasikia kama unaweza kushare something, ongea, usinyamaze. Sawa sawa. Kubali kwamba you need help na Mungu atakusaidia. Na kitu kingine ningependa kusema kwa caregivers, awe ni daktari, awe ni mzazi, mwenye anakaa na huyo ambaye anapitia shida, depression. Number one, amuonyeshe hope. Asijaribu kumkondem because hata yeye hajielewi. Sawa sawa. Because hata Mungu mwenyewe alisema kwamba while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Inamaanisha hata kama mtu wako kwa mabaya, inabidi aonyeshwe hope, na hiyo hope iko kwa Mwenyezi Mungu. Kwa hivyo asigive up na Mungu atawasaidia.
Asante sana, Joseph Gitumbe, ex-KDF officer, Byron Adera, pioneer, ex-Kenya Special Forces officer, and of course, Major retired Lucy Mukiria, who is a psychologist. Thank you guys for being such a source of inspiration and of course, motivation for others who've walked in the same shoes, but also putting it out there, some of the gaps that are and should be looked into, even as we take care of the wellness of those in the uniformed forces. Well, that's where we leave it for now, but tomorrow my colleague Victor Kiprop will be on the steering wheel. He will be focusing on digital lending at a time a lot of Kenyans heavily rely on these facilities. So, are they a make or break? Should the digital lending space be regulated? More on this from 7 a.m. See you then. Tomorrow, we'll be focusing on our mental health, to be precise, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, this is a reality for a lot of people who face traumatic events, but the question here is, how come some people are able to deal with the issue and move on and others somehow get stuck? We'll answer those questions tomorrow morning from 7 a.m. See you then.
Yourself inside my room, let me take you up. Take you up. Let me take you down. Lay you down. Let me show you up. Show you up. Let me turn you on. Turn you on. Let me show you some good lo 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 lo.